What's going on, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. We're going to continue with Dreamland today. This is chapter 48. It's called Great Time to be a Heroin Dealer, page 256. And I think we'll split this chapter into two. I think it's a pretty long chapter. So, Nashville, Tennessee. When new viruses appear, the discovery is often made by a local physician who stumbles upon a patient with disturbing new symptoms. Something similar happened when the Jalisco boys spread east of the Mississippi River, where Purdue's promotional campaign and new opiate prescribing practices were creating the epidemic's first addicts. Instead of doctors, though, it was usually patrol cops or a local narcotics detective who figured out what was happening. They encountered black tar heroin, saw it was delivered like pizza, and wondered, what the hell? So it was in 2005 in the Nashville suburb of Murfreesboro where a patrol cop came across an off-duty juvenile court bailiff smoking a black, sticky substance. It later tested as heroin. With the help of the accused bailiff eager to reduce his charges, Murfreesboro police put together a few buys and found it came from Mexicans who delivered the drug. When the bailiff called and ordered more, they came with it. The case expanded and made its way to the desk of Dennis Mabry, an investigator with the Nashville DEA task force, who didn't understand it any better than the Murfreesboro cop. As he and his partner tried to make sense of it, his task force boss, Harry Summers, dropped by. Since Tar Pit, which Tar Pit was that huge bust earlier in the book where they thought they busted all of the Jalisco boys at once. Summers had left his supervising job at DEA headquarters in D.C. He was now in charge of the agency's office in Nashville. But Summers hadn't forgotten Tar Pit and the Jalisco boys' system of selling heroin retail. 6 years later, he was startled to see that it had spread. "We had not stopped them," he said. "These guys were moving into new territory." Summers outlined the Jalisco call and deliver system for Mabry. "This is who you're dealing with," he said. "They're all from Nayarit." Neither Mabry nor his partner had heard the name before, but long before the Nayarit, that was all they thought about. The bailiff's case ballooned to consume 15 agents for a year. They followed drivers, watched buys go down, and tapped cell phones. The cell of Nayarit heroin delivery boys generated 10,000 cell phone calls a month, more than any wiretap translator could keep up with. The case connected investigators to 15 cities in 8 states. It became to be known as Black Gold Rush. The Jalisco boys got here and took over and made a ton of money, Mabry told me. They knew how to do it, and they were professionals. They'd carry the balloons in their mouths. They'd get stopped by police and swallow the balloons. What Mabry was seeing, it turned out, was a branch of the Jalisco networks that belonged to the Sanchezes, legends in the Nayarit heroin trade. Their story, near as I could piece it together, is typical of how a Jalisco clan spread its heroin operations. The Sanchez clan is rooted in villages near Jalisco, Aquiles Cerdan, Emiliano Zapata, and others. Like the Tejedas, the clan is a product of the isolation the Mexican rancho breeds, a bewildering intermarried web of cousins, brothers, sisters, half-siblings, in-laws, second cousins, stepfathers, mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles. The sugarcane farming Sanchezes were among the first to set up heroin operations in the San Fernando Valley in the early 80s. From there, they spread to Las Vegas. One trafficker I spoke with said an addict, an Argentine woman they knew as La Sasha, led the first Sanchezes from Las Vegas to Memphis in the early 90s. Memphis became one of the biggest markets for a while, he said. In 2004, a Memphis junkie led the Sanchezes to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he enrolled in the local methadone clinic and gave away their dope to the clients, police said. Police later arrested the junkie on a trafficking charge, but by then the Sanchezes had a foothold from which they expanded to Columbia and Charleston and eventually controlled much of the heroin trade in South Carolina. Since then, the Sanchez clan had reportedly defended its turf in a very non-Jalisco way, threatening with violence new cell leaders who move into the state. "You're not allowed to be working in South Carolina without their approval," said one DEA source in Charlotte. "Considering Charlotte is close to South Carolina, we'd expect an overlap of Charlotte's Jalisco crews into South Carolina, and we don't see much, if any." In Nashville, Mabry and his partners listened in as the local family boss, Javier Chito Sanchez Torres, spoke often by cell phone with his uncle, Alberto Sanchez Covarrubias, in Nayarit. Javier had done time in South Carolina for heroin trafficking. He was released in 2003 and somehow ended up in Nashville. In time, authorities grew to believe that this uncle, Alberto Sanchez, or Uncle Beto, as he was known, like Beto O'Rourke. No, wait, he's not known as Uncle Beto. Uncle Beto, as he was known, was a major source of heroin in the United States. Beto Sanchez was one of the Jalisco pioneers in the heroin business in the San Fernando Valley, informants said, and among the first Sanchezes to sell heroin in parks in Van Nuys, the district in LA, before the Jalisco crews began using cars and pagers. One informant said Beto Sanchez killed a client in a fight in a park in the early 80s and returned to Mexico, though Mabry could never find a record of the killing. Still, Mabry said, every time we'd arrest someone, it'd be, Beto is my cousin. He's my brother-in-law. They all knew Alberto Sanchez. They were all related to him somehow. Uncle Beto frequently instructed his nephew on new markets that might be exploited, on when the next supply was arriving, and especially on managing drivers, moving one guy, bringing in another to take his place. It was like trading cards or players on a sports team, Mabry said. He'd move guys who didn't get along, or if they got along too well and would screw off, spend all night drinking. Alberto Sanchez's cousin, Gustavo, was his right-hand man and full-time recruiter, trolling Jalisco for potential new drivers. Not only did the family constantly recruit new drivers, but they also never stopped seeking new territory. Sometime in the early 2000s, according to addicts and police, the Sanchezes sent some workers from Nashville up to start an Indianapolis cell. As time passed, the Sanchezes felt they needed someone to bring more energy to the task. I had several chats with the trafficker that they sent next. This fellow met Javier Sanchez Torres at a party in LA. The heroin boss recruited him to come to Nashville to work. I began as a driver with balloons in my mouth, the trafficker told me. After 6 months, I began to train other drivers. I'm in the house answering the phones and sending people where they have to go. By then, he said, the Sanchezes were well aware of OxyContin's role in this business. It was part of the marketing strategy, he said. Shiva is the same as OxyContin, just OxyContin is legal. OxyContin users change to Shiva. They can get our stuff more easily than going to a doctor for pills. As the trafficker earned the Sanchez family's trust, he drove resupply trips from their hub in Nashville to regional cells in Memphis, Charlotte, and Columbia, South Carolina. In 2006, with the family needing new management in Indianapolis, he was given 3 ounces of heroin and told to go grow the market. He rolled into Indianapolis brimming with the energy and optimism of a newly promoted regional sales manager. Let's make good money. Let's get this thing going, he kept saying. He recruited older addicts to spread the cell's number around town, offering them free heroin for every couple $100 in sales they generated. The addicts formed an eager sales force. They were looking more for volume than anything, to get it out there, said one indie addict who worked for him. You sell the product low enough and it'll create its own demand. Soon, suburban kids and students from Indiana University in Bloomington were coming out to buy. Jalisco black tar spread out for 100 miles around Indianapolis. Occasionally, drivers were replaced. All were from villages near Jalisco Nayarit. The trafficker I spoke with said he paid drivers $1,500 a week, with all expenses covered, including money for beer and prostitutes. When a runner was ready to return to Nayarit, the trafficker would give him 3 ounces of heroin for free. The runner would sell it, keep the profits, then drive the car back to Nayarit with enough cash to build a 2-story house or to buy a business. People who are poor and want to progress, you give them a hand, the trafficker said. Back in Jalisco, by then, more and more young men were turning to Chiva for that hand up. So we got about half of the chapter left after this, guys. We'll do that in a separate episode. Hope you're enjoying the book. Keep fighting that good fight out there. I'll talk to you later.